This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Glynn Tonsor, K-State livestock economist, begins the show with the cattle market update. He discusses the October meat demand monitor as well as a special demand report. K-State Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff continues today's show as he explains how cattle producers can check their calves for cold stress and help reduce the concerns of cold weather for their livestock. Ending today's show is K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts as he talks about what is being done to increase turkey populations. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Glynn, what is the cattle market looking like?
Lots of meetings, lots of excitement, kind of ending the year, I would say overall in a positive tone. Let's jump narrowly to this past week. You and I are talking here on Friday, so we're looking at Thursday information that's in hand at least. USDA called Thursday's numbers, fed cattle, 5 area, about 185, roughly flat on the week. They called the feeder cattle market stronger. Most weight classes were up. I'll say $5 per hundredweight was the norm. Of course, it varies by lot. 2 lots, just for reference here, is 240 head, came in at 573 pounds, or $3 flat. And then a bigger lot of 361 head, weighing 673, came in at 272. Both of those would be up, $2 to $4 compared to the week before. The tone, I would say, is improved. And why I'm interjecting that was a month ago, there was some pessimism seeping in because it had been dry. We've actually got some moisture the last couple of weeks, and I think we see that in the cattle markets also. When we look over to the board, so CME contracts, December live cattle was 186, up about $3 from the week before, and at least part of the way through here. Friday's pretty quiet Friday, so I think it'll be similar comment for the end of the week. January feeder cattle was 253, up nearly $10 on the week, so there's more bullish tone. Feedlot demand, I think, is building there for feeder cattle.
And what about for box beef cutout?
Yeah, USD called choice cutout on Thursday at 307. That's about $3 higher than Thursday before. And they called select at 273, which is down 4. It's not often we see that distinct of a pattern where choice is up that strongly and select is down. I don't anticipate that distinction to continue every week. That probably has more to do with some weakness in the select market that may not persist.
And Glenn, when you come in, always wanting to talk about what meat demand we're seeing and report your meat demand monitor that has recently come out.
Yeah, and before I lose everybody in those details, I'll back up just a moment, is I had the opportunity on Thursday to speak at the Kansas Livestock Association's annual convention, which was here in Manhattan. It's traditionally in Wichita. I've went to it in Wichita. It was more convenient because it was here for me personally, at least. And we did a deep dive on beef demand. I introduced and overviewed a lot of details. I'm sure lots of the listeners, I always talk fast. They probably definitely thought they were like drinking from a fire hose with me. But I was overviewing a lot of resources. And I'm interjecting that before we go any further to say there's a full PDF, right? That slide deck is on AgManager. You can get that. And again, we're just going to touch on a couple of them here at the moment. But one of the things I started with was clarifying demand versus consumption. And then I started to walk through the multiple demand measures that we sustain here at K-State. And to that point, I actually want to start with USDA data-based ones before we talk about the MDM, because there's a timestamp difference here. The latest USDA data-based meat demand information we have is for September, because there's a time lag. So you and I are talking here in the middle of November. There's usually roughly 6-week lag on being able to look at that. And the good news for September was beef demand was up compared to the prior year, September. Pork was down about 1%, but basically flat on the year, and chicken was up 1%. That is the domestic statement for September compared to September of 23. And the majority of the months in 2024, it's a little different number by species, but the majority of them have been higher than the same month in 2023. So it looks like we're rounding out 2024 in a pretty good tone when it comes to domestic meat demand is the point. We also put out export demand indices using USD information, and there's a similar positive tone there. Now, to flip that over to meat demand monitor, as you said, the reason I interjected and kind of hit pause was the nature of the data and the timing of the data is different. So you and I are talking here in November. The latest info I have from the meat demand monitor is October. But some of the punchlines from the October meat demand monitor would be is retail demand was up for 7 of the 8 categories we look at, including both beef as well as pork chop demand, chicken breast demand, and so forth. And then when we look over to food service demand, it was up as well. That's important to note because there's been several months in 24 that I've said retail demand was up, but food service was lower. I did not say that for October, so that's nice that both channels were stronger than September. That's worth watching, and one of the comments I made on Thursday was watch food service demand as we go forward. Hopefully that improves, and it did improve, it looks like, in October. The last thing I'll call out from the meat demand monitor specifically here in the October base report was one of the things we regularly track, and I've been commenting on it for a while now, is financial sentiment. So we ask folks every month, compared to a year ago, are your household finances better, the same, or worse? And the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index does the same thing. So I'm using their same question, one of their questions, I should say. And in October, 21% said my finances are better than a year ago. Now, of course, I would love for that to be an 80% or something. But what's important to take note of is a couple things. One is that 21% is larger than we've had in previous months. So it's been growing some during 2024. So that's good. I would say there's a slow growth in financial sentiment in the country. There's still reasons for concerns, and not everybody's, celebrating per se. But as the year has went on, it's gotten a little bit more rosy in the minds, and that's very good for meat demand. There's 2 specific points on why it's good. One is if somebody tells me their finances have improved, they're way more likely to have beef, pork, or chicken in their meal yesterday. So one of the things we include in the MDM is prior day. Right? What did you have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? The main point would be is that 21% that I said reported finances are improving, they tell me much more likely to have had beef, pork, or chicken yesterday, and they're a lot less likely to tell me they had a no protein. And that's not surprising. If you're more comfortable with your finances, you're going to pay for things you value but are a little more expensive, because meat is one of the more expensive food categories. So this makes sense, but it's worth tracking. The second part of that sentiment thing and that update in financial sentiment that's important is kind of the converse, is the group that tells me, and there's 35% of the public in October, that their finances are worse than a year ago. The main change they make is how much they go to the restaurant. And specifically what we reported in October was their spending away from home was about $45 per week lower than those that say my finances have improved. And $45 may not sound like a lot, but it is when it's a weekly number for a country our size. You add that up, it's a big aggregate expenditure difference, and it speaks to some of the food service challenges we've had the last 18 months. And that's why I highlighted earlier it was nice in October that food service demand was higher. And I hope we see that continue, perhaps with financial sentiment improving and people just getting more comfortable going back to restaurants.
And Glenn, when we talk about the meat demand monitor, this month we also got a special report. Yeah,
there's been a surge of things come from the meat demand monitor project in the last 6 weeks. I want to give a shout out first because some of that is from Justin Bina, who's now a faculty member at Arizona State, formerly here, worked a lot. And I'm interjecting that to give him some credit because there's some journal articles from this data that are out as well. You and I aren't going to break those down here for the sake of time. For those of you that follow LinkedIn or Twitter or just go straight to our AgManager page, you're seeing those as well. The one you've referenced here, which is the most recent hot off the press point, is I believe it was on Wednesday, was posted after approval, was something I call a consumer segmentation report. Some of our listeners probably know the National Pork Board did a very deep assessment of the public in 2023 and had what they call a consumer segmentation effort. So there's project reports and so forth out there. And at the end of the day, that effort, and I didn't lead it, I was just involved with it, and I'm well aware of it, is there's 7 segments in the public, and not everybody's equally price sensitive. And there's differences by generation. There's differences in the importance of price versus taste, and all those kinds of distinctions ultimately lead into 7 different groupings of the public. And one of the things that I used the MDM for, and the report you're calling out is available on our AgManager website, was can we recreate, kind of confirm those segments? So we used the MDM data and the same approach, but didn't dictate we get the same segments. This is really important. And I got very similar size. So I used a new data set, in this case MDM, and basically came up with the same conclusions on the size and composition of the segments. That should give the meat industry, and this is broader than pork because there's a multi-species component to this, the meat industry more confidence in those segmentation conclusions that these groups are different and this is how they're different, particularly when you come out with target marketing or new product promotion efforts and so forth. There's some pretty clear signals that some of these segments are better for a more expensive item with a taste claim, or maybe they're better for a price-sensitive group. You do the volume featuring and so forth for these things. My main point here is to raise awareness. That report's out. That's why you called it out. But the much bigger one would be is these kind of things are of value to you. By design, the MDM project is funded by the Beef and the Pork Checkoff, based here at K-State. Everything from it, the raw data, the surveys, and the reports that I'm trying to highlight briefly here today are all posted to our AgManager website. So please revisit that website and take use of those resources.
Glynn, what are some of those different segments?
Yeah, so as I said, there's 7 segments, and maybe I'll just call out a generational effect of this. There's a lot of dimensions to this, so if you have an interest in this, please go get the report. But the generational part I'll call out is the segments that are referred to as culinary adventurers, mindful choice makers, and cultural celebrators. And if you sum those up, they're about 38-39% of the public. They're more likely to be part of Gen Z or millennial generations. Conversely, the 2 segments that are called tasty value seekers and confident meat eaters, which also sum up to about 39%, so kind of equally sized groupings here, are much more likely to be baby boomers, so older generation here. The relevance of that point alone is kind of by definition over the years ahead, the baby boomer generation is going to decline in its relative percentage in our population, specifically for meat consumption and demand. So as we get older, you don't have the same household size, portion sizes, and lots of things evolve over time. Right? That's not shocking. But the interest, what drives the meat purchasing decision, what's important to people when they're making that is very different between those first 3 segments, right? The ones of the younger generation than the older ones. There's a place in the current marketplace for all of these groups. But one of the things we do is, what's the size of these and how are they different? And hopefully that generational point is kind of a bait point for our listeners to go look at that. And there's tables that document this in that report. We break apart the prior day consumption, how different your demand is, what's the relative importance of taste versus price. Lots of this stuff is there. And it's a lot more than generational, but there is a strong generational tone to these segments.
Glynn, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our cattle market update.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. I will link the resources that he mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about cold stress in cattle with K-State Extension beef veterinarian AJ Tarpoff. AJ, thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure to be here.
AJ, as we talk about cold stress, first wanting to mention signs of cold stress and what's showing that cattle are maybe a bit too cold.
Cattle experience the environment much different than we do. I think we all appreciate that. They're much more comfortable to a lower temperature than what we are. So, the adage, if you're cold, so are they, that's not the case. Cattle are robust. They are built for the cold. Maintained, they really thrive, they produce, they do very well whenever the temperatures start to drop. However, if it does drop below some of those comfortable areas for them, that's where we can see some of those behavioral changes. To a point, continued cold snaps, cattle cope and adapt very well. However, if we have a sudden storm, cold snap, where we have a pretty big change all at once, that's where we see a big behavioral change. And that's where cattle will reduce grazing behavior. They'll kind of get together in a certain location that's most comfortable out of the wind if they're out on pasture. So they reduce feed intake, they reduce some of those grazing behaviors, in essence, to try to get into a comfortable location out of the wind. And if they don't have that comfortable location, they actually group up as a true herd in a big group to try to block the wind from each other. If you just look at an animal, I mean, yes, they can shiver. They can do different things that, it is obviously, ears are a little droopy. They're just cold. If it's wet, all of those things can be different determining factors if we can see that, hey, maybe there's a little stress going on in the system.
And what is that combination of maybe how thick or long their hair is with the temperatures and how much they can handle?
We refer to that as the lower critical temperature. And essentially what that means is, at what temperature are they comfortable, and at what, temperature does it start to increase a little stress? Do they have to burn more energy to stay warm? And wet is really the big factor, because cattle can start experiencing a little bit of cold stress if they have a wet hide. If it just rained, here we are and coming in, November, early December, we can still get some rains rather than snows. If we have wet hides, they can start experiencing that cold stress even in the upper 50s. It's like, ooh, okay, well, it's chilly to us. Well, if you were wet and you walked outside from the shower, you would get chilled down. Cattle, it's no different. But when they start having a good, solid, dry hair, that thermal barrier is amazing. And so really a dry fall coat like we would see now, we're starting to develop some of those winter coats. Cattle are comfortable down to about freezing. And as we progress through the winter, they continue that hair growth and development. Those lower critical temperatures can get all the way down into the teens where they truly are comfortable. So I guess I bring that up that what we feel and what cattle feel are different. We do have a great service through the Kansas Mesonet. We have the Animal Comfort Index, and I know a lot of folks may have heard conversations about the Mesonet when it comes to heat stress, but the Animal Comfort Index also works for cold stress. You can see up-to-date information that is regional, so localized information statewide, but we also have a 7-day forecast. So you can see what the real feel for our animals are, even on a 7-day forecast. So you can plan ahead if you're going to change some of your management to help keep your cattle warm.
And when it comes to managing those cattle, maybe wanting to look into making, investing, creating a windbreak for them?
Windbreaks are great. And when I work with producers, temperature is one thing. It's the wind and the wind chill. When we start mixing humidity and wind, that's when things get pretty nasty. And that's what really we start seeing some of those extremes on that animal comfort index is when we have that humidity and that wind that really chills them down. So when I start thinking about windbreaks, there's a lot of different things that are out there. Those that have probably inherited some things from the older generations that actually planted some of those big tree windbreaks. Those are fantastic. Those are a comfortable barrier. They really block the wind well. They work great. Not in all of our scenarios and our winter grazing opportunities do we have a stationary in place, properly planted, tree row to be able to break up some of that wind. So some of the producers out in western Kansas, they might be grazing out on stalks. You're hauling water every day, but you also have an opportunity to have something mobile, whether it's, again, using what's available. It can be stock trailers. You can, back together a couple of extra stock trailers you have laying around, point them to the north and the west for the blocking the prevailing wind. You can even set up a creep gate and open the front door if your stock trailer has a front door, and you can bed the inside to allow calves to crawl in there to actually get out of the wind, be in a comfortable location, and we'll still have that windbreak for the mature cows outside. If you're going to build some type of either portable or stationary windbreak, I really, really push for portability. It's just it offers a lot more opportunity to be able to utilize those resources and get more uses throughout the year. So a general rule of thumb for however high you want your windbreak. So if you're going to build say a windbreak panel, you want it to be about 10 feet high. But what about the base? Everybody says, well, if you're going to build a windbreak, how wide does the base have to be to make sure it doesn't blow over? So we say 1.5 times the base for what the height is. So if you have a 10-foot, you want 15-foot base to make sure it's going to be very sturdy, very stationary, and you're not going to run into any problems. The other good thing about building something is you actually don't need to make a perfectly solid structure. You actually want those windbreaks to be porous. The whole goal is to slow down the wind, not completely block it. When you do that is you don't have buildup of snow. It allows for some of the air movement, blowing off some of the humidity and all of those things. So you want a porosity level of about 20 to 30%. So that's 20 to 30% less lumber that you would put on that panel to be able to make it effective. You want it high enough, but how much windbreak should you use, right? What's ideal? A good rule of thumb is you want that windbreak to be about 10 feet high, okay? And for however many animals you have, you really want it a foot per animal. So if you have 100 head, you would want that about 100 feet of windbreak. Those are rough numbers. It's an easy rule of thumb to work off of, but that's also one of the better windbreaks is you want a 10-to-1 ratio. If you're 1 foot high, you need it 10 feet long. Obviously, we need it higher than 1 foot, but a 10-foot high, which is ideal, we want about 100 foot of that windbreak surface if you're going to build that, and that provides an ideal environment to slow down that wind speed by about half for up over 100 feet downwind of that windbreak.
You mentioned possibly bedding a trailer for calves. Is there a time where maybe you need a bed somewhere for the mature cattle as well?
Absolutely. There are locations we can use these tools together. We can use a windbreak together along with a tool like bedding. Bedding, I am a huge fan of. I love bedding in a lot of different environments, whether it's out in the pasture to provide a really comfortable location right in face of maybe a blizzard or a really big cold snap. You want to keep animals heavily bedded to give them a thermal barrier from that frozen ground. Anything that we can do to keep them warm, that really helps. Even in a pen or a dirt lot scenario, we don't want buildup of tag or mud. What can help with that is having that clean, dry environment for them to lay down and rest, and that's where bedding can come into play. I completely understand bedding is an expense. You have cleanup afterwards. You have to pay for whatever that bedding was. You had to bale it. You had to purchase it. You had to haul it. Whether it's wheat stubble, corn stalks, whatever that might be. Usually it's a low-quality forage that cattle really aren't going to consume, but it can still provide a lot of added benefit. When folks ask about the economic returns, there's been some great work done in feedlot environments. Whenever it gets really cold, guess what? If you start to utilize things like bedding, yes, you can increase those big performance parameters like average daily gain, feed efficiency, all of those big payouts. When you bed, yes, it makes an economic difference. There was some work done out of South Dakota State that actually showed to finish cattle, these are, feedlot fat cattle, it actually took over 30 days less to finish them through the winter months whenever they were bedded on a daily basis. When we invest in comfort, there is a big economic return. We just need to be prepared for that.
And AJ, for those who are maybe fall calving or have younger calves, how can they check and make sure that they're doing okay and get them warmed back up if they're not?
So warming up calves, preparing for calving season, whether you're going to have younger calves for these initial cold snaps, or you're going to be starting calving season here in the next month or so, my first thing, make sure you have a rectal thermometer. Everybody's got an old thermometer from COVID times laying around. Now you can put it back to work, right? You can keep it in your calving kit, and you can utilize that when you're out checking your animals. Are they hypothermic or low body temperature? A normal body temperature of a calf, even when it's born, but it should maintain that normal body temperature of 101.5 to about 102.5. If it starts dropping below 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that animal needs a little bit of help to get back up and going and get it warmed back up. That can be as simple as putting it on the floorboard, of the front seat of the pickup and to slowly start warming it up. However you're going to warm those up, whether you have a commercially made hot box, if you have a heating lights and warm blankets, all of those are investments, but they take time. We all talk about, putting a calf in a bathtub. Yes, it's warm water immersion. Again, it's labor intensive. Even the best way to warm these calves up, be prepared. It doesn't happen immediately. We warm them up slowly over time, and it can take 1.5 to 2 or even 3 hours to properly warm them back up to temp. I guess in preparation for warming calves is if you warm calves in the garage, if you do it out in the barn, whatever the means that you have, get prepared, get everything together where you don't have to scramble last minute right in the middle of a snowstorm. There's enough stressors already going. A little bit of pre-planning and getting things together will go a long way. And don't forget to throw that rectal thermometer, those little digital ones. Toss one in your calving kit. You can drive around with it, and it will help with that determining factor. Does this calf, is it up to temp? Does it need a little extra help? AJ,
I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was K-State Extension beef veterinarian AJ Tarpoff. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about turkeys with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shelby.
Drew, today talking about turkeys because seeing a bit of a decline in the wild turkey population.
Yeah, that's right. And also because it's Thanksgiving week. But turkeys basically throughout their range in the United States have been declining for a number of years. And that's concerning to folks who care about turkeys, either because they hunt them or because they enjoy seeing them. Also to wildlife management agencies who are charged with managing for healthy populations.
Today, talking about a couple of studies that may be trying to figure out how to repopulate some wild turkeys. And first one, mentioning a study from Tennessee.
Yeah, so the study in Tennessee was addressing one of the concerns that folks have who are interested in wild turkeys. Basically, there's an idea that maybe we're harvesting male turkeys before they have an opportunity to breed hens, and that could be reducing hatchability of nest, clutch sizes, and those sorts of things.
Are we harvesting too early?
Well, what this study looked at was the normal harvest date in Tennessee where they were at, or the initiation of hunting season, is the beginning of April. And for several years in several counties prior to the initiation of any treatments, they looked at clutch size, the number of hens producing clutches, survivability, all kinds of the female and chick side of turkey production before any treatments were applied. And then in half of the counties that they were looking at, they delayed hunting season by about 2 weeks. In the other half of the counties, they didn't make any changes. So with that shift of initiating hunting to the middle of April rather than the beginning of April, they saw no changes in the number of chicks that were recruited into populations, the hatchability of chicks, clutch sizes, the number of hens nesting, and those sorts of things.
What about from a study that happened in Southeast U.S. looking at if we're killing more turkeys than what would naturally die in a year?
Sure. So this is a different study that encompassed several states in the southeastern U.S. Both of these studies were conducted across a number of years with big sample sizes, so they're really robust results. And the big question here is harvest of turkeys additive to natural causes of mortality, or would we actually see that by harvesting some individuals, then we see the natural mortality from different causes go down so that the losses to hunting are actually compensated for, and we see no change in overall survival of turkeys in that population.
Are we killing too many? Are we not? What does that all look like, Drew?
Well, what this study found was that in populations of turkeys that were hunted, adult male survival, and that's important to mention, they were looking at adult male survival and juvenile male survival. They weren't looking at population growth rates, so they didn't get at the overall health of the population, but they found that in hunted populations, survival of adult males was about 54%, and survival of juvenile males was about 86%. When they compared that to turkeys in non-hunted populations, they saw that adult male survival was 83%. And so what that basically told them was that hunting mortality for adult male turkeys is additive to natural causes rather than being compensated for by reductions in natural causes. And one of the reasons that that's important is, we've had these declines in turkey production, and recently the state of Kansas reduced the number of tags that we have for male harvest in the spring. They also closed the fall turkey hunting season when you can harvest males or females. And so based on the results of this study, if we see the same thing in Kansas, that reduction in harvest should increase the number, at least of male turkeys in the population that we start seeing.
So just an adjustment to hopefully repopulate that wild turkey population?
Yeah, and repopulate might be the right word, but I think helping them not further decline, and also seeing more around, and I guess repopulate is probably the right term there.
Drew, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about turkeys.
Absolutely. Gobble, gobble.
That was K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.